Hey guys, Coach Chris here, back with another video. Picking up with round 3 of this tournament that I was playing in last Saturday. Again, game in 25 5-second delay. This time I'm black against an opponent rated 1590. He plays e4, I play the French, and we get the advanced variation. c5 attacking the base of the pawn chain, c3 defending it. And I like to go for this plan where we just immediately trade off our bad light squared bishop. White just castled, I captured, and then I like queen a6 here. The idea, if allowed, will be to go for a queen trade. A queen trade always favors black in the French pawn structure. The reason that's so is because white's pawns are pointing towards the king side. That's where white wants to attack. That's where black's king usually ends up, and so for that checkmating attack, white usually needs the queen, whereas black's pawns are pointing to the queen side, and we don't need a queen to make progress on the queen side. So queen trades are always desirable, so I offered one with queen a6. Opponent declined with queen c2, and now I took on d4. The idea is I would like to, if recaptures, fix that pawn on d4 and then start to attack it. Instead, my opponent recaptured with the knight, still knight c6. Same idea, happy to capture and fix that weak pawn on d4. Opponent captured me, I recaptured. I'm happy to see this. I've got the open b file potentially. Potentially extra central control with the c-pawn, so I was happy to see that. Bishop e3, I start to develop the knight. I wondered in the game, what if bishop c5? I wasn't exactly sure. The engine says that after knight g6, if white does go for this capture, then literally every possible recapture is completely fine. Not sure which one I would have chosen, but in any event, my opponent played knight d2 instantly, and I played knight f5, hitting the bishop. The f5 square is usually where the kingside knight goes in these advanced French structures, and my opponent just developed. And here, while the engine doesn't say this is an inaccuracy, during the game, and as I've thought about it more after the game, this doesn't quite feel right to me. So in a lot of advanced French structures, you can win an endgame by having a great knight against a bad bishop. Also, I'm moving this knight 3 times to capture a bishop that's only moved once. I don't love that. And so we get to this position, white recaptures. You know, instead of capturing the bishop, I mean, what's wrong with just developing a piece? That's, in hindsight, I would have preferred bishop e7. Instead, I captured, white recaptured, and now I played bishop c5 with tempo. My opponent blitzed out rook g3, and here I thought for a minute, and I saw queen to e2, but the only thing I saw about it was that it pins the knight to the queen. I totally missed that now I've got 2 attackers on f2. White doesn't have time for rook takes g7. We can play bishop takes f2 check, king to the corner, and now a really cool little maneuver, king f8, inviting white to capture on h7. The rook is currently protected by the queen. But after king e7, now queen is a bit overloaded. We've got open files leading to the king, and says this is just winning for black. So cool idea there from the engine. White doesn't have time for rook takes g7. So then if rook f1, then black can just castle. It looks a little scary to have the rook and queen aiming at the king side. But the longer you look at it, the more you realize white has absolutely nothing here. There is no kingside attack, and black is comfortably better. Alright, so instead of that move that would have given me an advantage, I played g6. This is my favorite kind of blunder, if that's not a ridiculous thing to say, where I'm blundering from an advantage to an equal position and not, blundering into it as a completely lost position. So we're still equal here. The game continues, but this is passive, and of course I should have played queen to e2. Knight b3, hitting the bishop, bishop back, queen to e2, d2, and I was a little bit worried about the queen coming in to the dark squares on the king side, and I played h5. I didn't love it. I'm making lots of pawn moves, it seems like. I would really like to get my rooks in the game, but h5. Queen d3, which I was very happy to see, because now I get in my queen trade. And with my king still in the middle, that's actually an advantage now that we're moving into an endgame, because my king is much closer to the action than my opponent's. But after the queen trade, I blitzed out c5. The very obvious threat that no one's going to fall for is to fork those two pieces. In hindsight, I wish I would have played king d7, immediately freeing up the h8 rook to get involved in the game. Keeping this c-pawn on c6 for now really solidifies the center, because white can't open up the d-file, because I can just recapture with the c-pawn, and that would just make my h rook to c8 an even better piece. And then once the rook comes over, then if I were to ever need to guard at f7, then my king can just drop back. In hindsight, this seems far more harmonious and reasonable than what I played. I played c5, opponent just moved his knight away, and now I kind of have to play c4, because otherwise white plays c4, so c4, rook over. I played king d7, but now white has time to open up the position, and I thought white would play this. I thought it was a great move at the time. Engine thinks it's a little inaccurate, not because of the move I played, I captured. The engine says that the way to exploit this is bishop g5, hitting the rook, giving up this awesome dark squared bishop for the knight, which doesn't have many squares right now, but the idea that I failed to grasp is rook hc8, and now if white takes, we've got just awesome rooks, and if, let's say b4, I think a5 is the move, yeah, a5, cracking open these queenside pawns, and again, getting the queenside files for our rooks. It's just really good for black. So I briefly considered this. I didn't want to give up the dark squared bishop for this knight, and I failed to appreciate how important it was to get that rook into the game immediately. So I played c takes b3. White recaptured. Another reason why my move isn't great is because now white didn't have to do anything to get an excellent rook on a1 with lots of annoying pressure on my a7 pawn, and as we'll see in the game, the a6 square. I finally get my h rook over, and of course white opens up the center. My king's in the center. White would like to get rid of these hanging pawns on c3 and b3 if possible. Again, I can't really just keep the d pawn here, because after takes, this is a d5 would be a weak isolated pawn, so I have to take. And now white's knight is very active. I played bishop c5 so that I can slide the king over when the rook attacks f7. Knight in. I defended the pawn again with rook f8. Just admitting that my strategy has failed and trying to keep a little tension left in the position. But rook a6 is a very annoying move. I captured the knight. White recaptured with the pawn. Now this is a passed pawn that I need to keep an eye on. could be a weakness, but right now can't capture it. So king d7, rook over, threatening checks. I contest the file, white takes, and I recaptured with the king. Both recaptures were fine. Rook c6 check, and I didn't want to play king d7 because I was afraid of rook c7, but the engine says this is nothing to be afraid of. Basically every single move is a draw in this position, according to the engine. I played rook d8 with the idea of contesting the file. White played rook a6, we repeated moves. And here I came up with the idea of trying to advance the queenside pawns to give myself a shelter, so that if there were checks now, I could recapture, or I could capture the d6 pawn, and then hide from checks, or move the pawn away from checks. So here's how it worked out. e5, and now the idea, attack white's b pawn. White took my a pawn with check, capture the d pawn, and now after some checks, my king has a safe square on f5. That was the point of moving the queenside pawns. White now protects the b pawn. I nail it down to b3. And in this position, my initial intention was g4. And after takes, I would have played the blunder king takes g4, which fails to the same idea we'll see in the game. Instead, rook g4, it looks good to my eye. I like having this e-pawn, but the engine says white just defends. Like, how are you going to make progress with black? And there is no way. So my original intention was g4. I played h4, and after g4, I thought, well, hey, I'm just winning here. King f4, gonna gobble up all the pawns. And this just blunders. My opponent immediately played the winning move, rook a4. And here I thought I was just dead lost, because I am dead lost. The point is I can't capture because now the b pawn, which becomes the a pawn, is just way too fast. I played rook d4 instead of resigning, just to try. And my opponent played rook takes d4, which looks like it just wins easily. It doesn't win, shockingly, and we'll see why in the game, and if we have time we'll come back to see how white could have won. I recaptured, and now white starts pushing that outside pawn, and the idea is that shouldn't white just be able to pick up all my kingside pawns since my king is so far away? But in its concrete position, the f pawn keeps the king out, and so I have time to bring the king over. I'm just in time to defend. Here I was hoping for king g6, king up, white wastes a move, and then I thought, aha, I'm going to win after f5 because he has to take me, I'll recapture, and then I'm going to win the pawns and win the game. Which would have blundered to just king g6. White doesn't have to take. Instead, white can attack the pawn that I just left unprotected, and white wins that endgame easily. There's nothing I can do there. Instead, he played f4, and we shuffled around a little bit and eventually agreed to a draw. White's going to win this pawn, but because white's extra pawn is an h-pawn, white can't win. The point, the reason why rook takes d4 immediately isn't the win. It's because I have that f-pawn keeping the king out, and so the killer win here, very easy to miss in extreme time pressure like we were, is king f2. And the point is, go ahead, black, make a move. According to the engine, it's plus 99, and black's best move that doesn't get mated, at least in 45 moves or so, is f5. And now the same idea works. Now you can take, the point is now you can take the f pawn, and white just wins. If we look at the same type of defense, white is just in time. Anyway, that's the game. Interesting round 3. Got a draw.